Hello everyone and welcome to a video where I'm going to talk about my most wanted albums. This is basically a list with 10 albums which are hard to find on a physical release and or they go for extremely high prices, so it makes it even more hard to get a copy out of these projects. So if that's a video that feels familiar, this is because YRXHim made a video about this topic, and I felt that this was a pretty interesting topic of discussion. I always saw myself that I wanted to make videos like this, so I decided that I want to make my own version of it and basically present my list with my most wanted albums. So shout out to YRXHim, I think he's one of the better YouTubers in the underground metal scene, and overall I like his content. I occasionally see his videos and I think that some of his later stuff are quite fun and entertaining. So with that being said, the one thing I'm going to change compared to the YRXHim video is that I'm not just going to strictly talk about vinyl records. I'm going to mention albums that I would love to have in a physical format, no matter what the format is. I don't care if it's going to be CD or vinyl, because some of the albums I'm going to talk over here never had a vinyl press in the first place, but even their CD or CDR versions are really tough to find, or they just go for enormous prices. Which, yeah, it's understandable that in occasions it's more hard to find limited edition vinyl compared to CDs as a format, but we're talking about occasions where even if I find those albums on CD, I would be really pleased and I would love to have them on my collection. We're not even going to mention cassette collectors. Those people, I'm pretty sure they've been through a lot. Another thing to clarify is that there are albums that I would put in the category of most wanted, that I would actually want more, but this is basically about albums that it's kind of easier to find, but still I have struggled in order to find them in a reasonable price, or it's just really hard to find them because I'm in Greece and some of the US releases are not that easy to find. Some of the main examples I have is pretty much most of the discography from Death Grips. I'm pretty lucky to have 2 CDs of them and I got them in a very good price, but finding their discography in Greece is not that much of an easy task. Same thing with like the self-titled from Clipping. I've never seen anyone in Greece selling this, or like with Atrocity Exhibition by Danny Brown, or basically anything from Run the Jewels. But you know, I still have hopes that I might eventually get any of these albums. On the other hand, the 10 albums I'm going to present here are basically those albums where I think there is no hope anymore. If there's not going to be a repress anytime soon, there is no way for me to ever get close to a copy of any of these albums. And I feel that even if there's going to be a repress in any of these albums, I feel that they're either going to be automatically in a very high price, or they're just going to sell out in the first 10 seconds they're going to be up for sale, so I'm going to get screwed. So with that being said, this is a very long introduction, let's just jump straight into the video. The first one I have is the oldest release from this list, which goes back in 1979, and this is Chance Meeting on a Dissecting Table of a Sewing Machine and an Umbrella by Nurse with Wound. Yeah, it's actually kinda hard to get some of the stuff from Nurse with Wound, as they go for some outlandish prices, and I consider myself to be quite lucky for having numerous stuff from him and getting them into a somewhat reasonable prices. But out of all the albums, the very first one from Nurse with Wound feels like it's the hardest to find, and it's a shame because it is definitely one of my favorite favorite works from them. I could also put in this category the album Drunk with the Old Man of the Mountains, one of my all-time favorite works, but there is still the 2005 pressing on CD, which can go into some quite reasonable prices. On the other hand, when it comes to the debut, there's only like the 1990 CD version that has some okay prices, but even in this occasion they're quite expensive. And don't even try to just search vinyl prices on Discogs, because you would be lucky if you find anyone selling this under $100 or euros. The second one I have is dedicated to Peter Kürten, Sadist and Mass Slayer by Whitehouse. If you think it's hard to get a copy of a Nurse with Wound album, well, it's 100 times harder to get your hands on a Whitehouse record. I'm pretty sure anyone who is a Whitehouse collector knows the struggle, because they've really done it so hard to get your hands in any Whitehouse project. Even digitally, it's really hard to pretty much find anything. I mean, obviously in a non-pirating way. But if there is one album I would love from have in my collection from Whitehouse the most, it is dedicated to Peter Kürten. This 1981 release is definitely one of the harshest and one of the most brutal and greatest examples of power electronics out there. Easily one of my favorite and one of the essential albums of power electronics in my opinion, with some really brutal and disgusting sounds that just pierce your ears, and it's just a really haunting and disturbing experience from start to finish. And the one thing that actually pisses me off about this release in particular is that out of most of the releases from Whitehouse, this is the one that actually got a repress recently. But the thing is that it immediately got sold out, and it would start being sold on Discogs in some really insane prices, so I couldn't get my hands in a copy of the repress of this album from Whitehouse, and I doubt that there's ever going to be a repress of this album anytime soon because of that. So yeah, that's a bit of a bummer, but yeah, I mean, this is a solid work from Whitehouse, in my opinion at least, if you haven't heard this already and you want to get into some really brutal and disgusting power electronics. At number 3, I have Non-Friendly by the Gero Gero Yeah Yeah Yeah. Now, getting into the Gero Gero Yeah 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 discography, this is another band that it's really hard to get a physical copy in any of their releases, and also a great reason for that is Japan. Basically anything that comes out of Japan automatically makes it much harder to get a physical copy of, especially if it's from a Japanese label, which is basically the case with almost anything the Gero Gero Yeah 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 have in their massive and very varied discography. Now, out of everything they've put out, my all-time favorite album from them is this continuous 58-minute drone piece that it's the same thing over and over, but it has ended up being my favorite drone piece. This is definitely my most listened drone piece, and it serves greatly for just background music. I've played this occasionally and I love it even more the more I listen to it, because I really like the sound and just the genius behind the whole idea and how it's portrayed in its lengthy runtime. But this album was basically just released on CD. Obviously it would be a dumb move in my opinion to press this on vinyl, but there's only one selling it on Discogs for 70 euros. So yeah, not getting a copy of this album anytime soon. Speaking of another Japanese release that it's almost impossible to find, it's basically most of the stuff from Hanataras. And the albums I like from this artist the most are Hanataras 1 and 3, William Bennett Has No Dick, which are two of the greatest examples of Japanoise you can find, fusing so many other great elements of like punk and just the sort of danger music sound that he had in the early 80s, and even in their sound they were so brutal, so ahead of their time, and so unique, even in Japanoise standards. But basically pretty much anything from Hanatara's hasn't seen a repress for years. It's even hard to find someone selling a copy on Discogs in any of their albums, and if you see a copy they're probably going to be extremely expensive. So yeah, hopefully there's going to be a repress anytime soon, which I mean, it's really bizarre why there hasn't been already, since we're talking about some essential works in the entire Japanoise scene. So yeah, fingers crossed, hopefully there's going to be a repress in any of those albums, but especially 1 and 3 in the future. At number 5 we have another Japanese release, but now we're getting furthermore away from the noise and the experimental drone stuff, because now we're going to talk about happy hardcore and lollycore with the album No Style No Policy by Killing Scum. Basically getting it to sounds like lollycore and happy hardcore. It's a very hit or miss genre, but this one and only release from Killing Scum is the magnum opus from anything lollycore related. It's actually one of the first albums in the genre, and its sound for just being in 2003 was just so ahead of its time, and overall the structures from the songs and how imaginative it was with the samples, it was something that I haven't seen any other album just have in the way No Style No Policy does, which is an album that is released by Sharpnel Sound, and DJ Sharpnel is one of those artists that basically started this whole Japanese happy hardcore lollycore sound with all of those cute anime samples just being fused into just aggressive hardcore beats. And if you've basically searched anything from Sharpnel Sound, you know that it's really hard to get a physical copy in any of those albums, but it's even hard to find any of their works digitally. Obviously, I mean, once again, in a non-pirated way. But yeah, this was only released in 2 CDR versions back in 2003. The first one is the most cohesive and the most consistent lollycore album you can find out there, and the second one is a compilation version where it has some bonus material where some of them feel like filler, and no one sells any of the two versions on Discogs, which is basically the case with almost anything from the label Sharpnel Sound. At number 6, another Japanese release. What a surprise! Yeah, what we have over here is Sunwave Solo by Sachiko M. Pretty much another case where it's really hard to find physical releases from any of the artists that go into the sounds and the genres of Onkyo and EAI, especially if we're talking about Japanese releases. Sachiko M's discography is quite hit or miss for me. There are works from her that I don't really like, but Sunwave Solo on the other hand, I think it's one of the better crafted and one of the more intriguing and more unique albums I've heard in this whole sound, and I love the frequencies, how ear-piercing some of them are, lots of the glitchy portions, and just how experimental and out there it is. And like I said, in this whole category I could put so many other artists that have works attached with her, like Toshimaru Nakamura for example, but Sunwave Solo in particular, it's another case of an album that has only one version on CD, never repressed again, and no one sells it on Discogs. At number 7 is an occasion that baffles me and shocks me, because why in God's name has there not yet been a repress of Igor's Hallelujah or even Nostril? Seriously, why don't we have a repress of these albums? And I remember from like back in the day, like the prices on the vinyl from Hallelujah were extremely high, and now at this point no one sells it on Discogs currently. Basically, Gore is a group that has managed over the years to become more and more popular, sticking more into sounds of death metal but combining them with baroque classical music, opera, and even some elements of breakcore. And the two works they have on Metal Blade Records have managed to give them a much bigger recognition, so I honestly don't care if it's Metal Blade Records that's going to make a repress on the previous works from Igor, but someone please do it. At number 8 it's Constant Shallowness Leads to Evil by Coil. Now Coil is one of those bands that has a massive and very varied discography, and there are so many albums that I would love for them to just have a proper repress and not just unofficial releases, and also just going for some really high prices. And one of the albums I would love the most a repress is Constant Shallowness Leads to Evil, one of the most underrated works from Coil that I haven't seen people talk about as much, and it's kind of a shame because I think it's one of the better, most intriguing and most unique albums they have in their entire catalog. Sure, I can get it, it's one of their most aggressive and one of their more experimental and out there works. I mean, this album even has moments that goes into a harsh noise direction, and I would say that this is actually a great album for starters of harsh noise music. If you want to get into noise music, I think that this album in particular from Coil can be to your liking, and it's a nice way to get into noise music with this album in my opinion. At number 9, let's change direction and let's get into the horrorcore route with Snuff Porn Gore by Butcher's Harem. Now, the sound of horrorcore is another sound that it's kind of hit or miss for me, but this is basically the apex of horrorcore sound, being so brutal and so just disgusting, to the point where I haven't seen any other group in this sort of sound being just so filthy. And even if you look at the album cover or the inserts of this thing, I was just disgusted and disturbed when I first saw this, but now I'm at this point where I actually need it. This brutal and absolutely menacing horrorcore album was only pressed on CD, and there was a collector's edition in a box with a mask or something, if I recall it correctly, and I think at the moment only 3 people sell it on Discogs and it just goes for high prices. I don't know if there's going to be a repress of this anytime soon, but hopefully there's going to be one. In this position I'm also going to include the second album from Butcher's Harem, which is not anything that cheaper on Discogs, and also that's the case with the other project one of the members has with the noisy speedcore and breakcore project Passenger of Shit. I would love a physical copy of Passenger of Shit too. I love this album. And since we're talking about noisy and highly aggressive breakcore stuff, let's end it one with the split from Venetian Snares and Stunt Rock Fuck Canada, Fuck America. If you count out Venetian Snares' collaboration with Speedruns on Making Orange Things, this is the harshest and the most brutal work he has in his discography, but it's actually Stunt Rock who steals the show, with his side being just so disturbing but also being so funny and ridiculous at points, and it's just so amateur. The mixing on this thing, it's so weird. This approach on breakcore music and this use of samples, which I have no idea where he found those samples, just makes the sound so so unsettling. And yeah, this is definitely one of my favorite works of all time. It is one of a kind experience, quite underrated work. And the case with this album is that it was only released as a CDR back in 1999 and no one sells it on Discogs. So yeah, these are my 10 most wanted albums. 10 albums that I don't see myself ever getting a physical release of them. Once again, shout out to Wirex Him. I'm going to leave the original video with his most wanted albums down in the description, and let me know what are your most wanted albums down in the comments. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video, subscribe for more content like this. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video. Goodbye.